The cameras were rolling. The audience was waiting, but nobody could have predicted what was about to happen. When Melania Trump walked onto the stage, the interview seemed routine. The questions were sharp, but she was composed. The host, known for his tough stance on political figures, pushed harder, wanted a reaction, and then it happened. One unexpected question. A pause. And her response changed everything. The studio fell silent. The journalist's confident demeanor vanished. His face froze. He tried to continue, but the damage was done. Social media exploded. Clips of this moment were everywhere. People couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. This interview was supposed to be just another headline-making TV appearance, but no one expected it to go down in history. It all started as usual. Bright studio lights, a host ready to ask tough questions, and an audience watching every move. Seated across from the interviewer was Melania Trump, with her signature composed demeanor, flawless style, and calm expression. The cameras captured the moment she placed her hands on the table and looked straight into the lens. The first questions were routine. They asked about life after the White House, her charity initiatives, and what she was currently working on. The host tried to inject some sharp remarks, but Melania answered confidently and calmly, skillfully avoiding any tracks. Then, the tone of the conversation suddenly shifted. The host leaned forward, his voice becoming more aggressive. He asked a question clearly designed to corner her. At that moment, the atmosphere in the studio changed. The audience tensed up, holding their breath, waiting for her reaction. This was no accident. The question was carefully planned by the editorial team. This tactic had been used many times before. The host throws out a provocative statement, expecting either a defensive reaction or awkward silence. Either way, it would make headlines. But Melania didn't flinch. She remained completely composed. For a few seconds, she just stared directly at the journalist, saying nothing. It was a battle of two worlds, he confident in his power, believing he had cornered her, and she calm, unwavering, as if she already knew exactly what was about to happen. The host repeated his question, this time emphasizing each word. He was waiting for a reaction, pushing, trying to provoke an emotional response. But Melania didn't rush. She held her pause, making the tension in the studio skyrocket. This was that very moment when even the audience in the room started to feel that something big was about to unfold. The silence dragged on. The host began to grow uneasy. His face shifted. First, a slight hint of confusion, then the realization that he was losing control of the situation. He was certain that Melania would either try to dodge the question or say something that could be used against her. But instead, she smiled. That was the most unexpected moment. She wasn't just answering. She was completely controlling the situation. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, yet firm. This wasn't a defense. It wasn't an excuse. It was an attack. The host wasn't ready for this. His face changed, first mild confusion, then disbelief, and then a desperate attempt to regain control. He was speechless. His strategy had failed. Instead of the reaction he had hoped for, he had suffered a public defeat. But the most important part was still ahead. The studio fell into complete silence. The cameras captured the shock on the faces of the audience. Even those who had come in with strong opinions against her couldn't believe what they had just heard. The host desperately tried to change the subject, but it was already too late. Melania's words were spreading like wildfire across social media. This broadcast could no longer be stopped. What did she say? Why did even the journalist lose his words? That answer, the one that shocked the world, comes later. But first, let's understand how we got here. Silence filled the studio for several seconds, but it felt like time had stopped. The host sat frozen, unsure how to react. Normally, he could maneuver out of tough situations, quickly shift the topic, or push his guest into a defensive stance. But this time, things were different. He looked into the camera, then back at Melania, as if trying to process what had just happened. And something irreversible had happened. Melania didn't just answer. Her words flipped the entire situation. She didn't react as expected, didn't hesitate, didn't avoid the question. Instead, her response was so precise and direct that the host completely lost control of the conversation. The tension in the air was almost tangible. The cameraman switched to the audience. Some looked shocked, others unsure whether to applaud or remain silent. But this was just the beginning. Within minutes of the broadcast, social media exploded. Twitter was flooded with posts quoting her response, and hashtags with her name skyrocketed to the top of trending lists. Some journalists called it a defining moment, showcasing a completely different side of Melania Trump. Not just the wife of a former president, but a person who could take a hit and strike back. Meanwhile, in the White House, an unrelated meeting was in progress when someone interrupted. "Have you seen what Melania just did?" Advisors exchanged glances. Some opened videos, others read headlines from major news outlets. Even those who were skeptical of the Trump family had to admit, this interview was going to change how millions perceive Melania. In New York, at one of the country's biggest news agencies, editors were scrambling to rewrite headlines. The original plan had been to focus on the interview itself and highlight the host's questions. But after what had happened, it was obvious that Melania's response was the real story. The host, who that morning had been confident that his interview would dominate the news cycle, now sat in his dressing room, staring at his phone, watching his name trend in the worst possible way. Producers of the show held an emergency meeting. The debate was whether to ignore the controversy, try to paint the host as a victim, or spin the interview in a different direction. But the problem was, the public had already made up its mind. One of the biggest TV networks in the US aired a segment of the interview in prime time. Then, hundreds of YouTubers began making reaction videos and analysis breakdowns. The clip racked up millions of views within hours. Late-night talk shows and political analysts were already dissecting the moment, each offering their own take. Some called it a failure for the host, others a triumph for Melania, while some tried to remain neutral. Meanwhile, at Trump Tower in New York, Donald Trump was already typing out a tweet. There was no way he would stay silent. When his tweet went live, the reaction exploded even further. But the biggest blow was still to come. The host tried to do damage control. He even recorded a short Twitter video, saying he was just doing his job. But no one was listening anymore. The public wasn't interested in explanations. They wanted a show, and they got one. The television host was trying to pull himself together, but his face said it all. He had lost control of the interview. Every movement betrayed his unease. He rubbed his hands together, glanced down at his notes, but didn't read them. The producers behind the scenes, realizing the situation was spiraling, desperately searched for a way out. Someone suggested cutting to a commercial break early, but it was too late. This moment was already spreading like wildfire across social media. Journalists from other media outlets were present in the audience. Some exchanged glances, scribbled in notebooks, or typed furiously on their phones. They knew that this interview was going to dominate the headlines. One reporter even left the studio early. He knew he had to publish an article before the internet was flooded with reactions. But the most significant development was how public reaction was shifting in real time. At the start of the interview, viewers were engaging as usual, expecting the usual tension. But after Melania's response, everything changed. The conversation wasn't just about the interview anymore. It had become a debate. Some praised her composure, others called her words bold, and some simply couldn't believe she had dared to say what she did. Meanwhile, outside the studio, a media storm was already forming. News agencies across the US scrambled to rewrite headlines, editors issuing last-minute directives to shift the narrative. Those originally planning to cover politics suddenly pivoted to this interview. Evening talk shows were already preparing special segments, where panelists and political analysts would dissect every second of what had just happened. An hour after the broadcast, CNN ran a breakdown of the moment. The anchors didn't hide their surprise. This was unexpected. We're used to seeing her as more reserved, but today she showed a completely different side of herself. At the same time, Twitter exploded. Under one of the viral clips of the interview, over 200,000 comments appeared within 30 minutes. Influencers, journalists, and ordinary users flooded the platform with memes, jokes, and heated discussions. Some compared the moment to the most intense political debates in history. But the impact of the interview stretched far beyond America. European media outlets rushed to publish online articles, with headlines like, "How one interview changed Melania Trump's public image." The moment the TV host was left speechless, and an unexpected turn. how the former First Lady won a debate without raising her voice. Even in Russia, where American politics is often treated with skepticism, political analysts couldn't ignore the moment. A Russian TV commentator remarked, "Look at how interesting this is. Even when Trump isn't in power, his family remains at the center of the media battlefield." And in China, where image control is a strategic part of politics, bloggers on Weibo analyzed the interview from a different perspective. Look at how strategically she handled this. She waited, held her pause, and then delivered the strike. This is the tactic of a real negotiator. But the most unexpected response came from Donald Trump himself. 2 hours after the interview aired, he finally tweeted. It was just a short sentence, but it was enough to set the internet on fire. "Now you see why she's my first lady." That was all. No further explanation was needed. After the interview, Melania's approval rating among Republican voters jumped by 12%. A poll conducted by a political research group showed that over 70% of respondents now viewed her as a figure capable of handling political discourse. But the biggest impact wasn't in the numbers. It was in the fact that this moment couldn't be erased. The show, which had expected to make headlines with a powerful interview, suddenly became the story itself. The producers didn't know what to do next. If they ignored the situation, it would look weak. If they tried to defend the host, it would only make the defeat more obvious. Meanwhile, Fox News ran a primetime discussion with the headline, "The moment that showed Melania Trump's true strength." And the host, still sitting in his dressing room, knew one thing. This career would now always be associated not with his questions, but with that one answer. This interview had permanently changed the media landscape. And now, there was only one question left. What happens next? When the broadcast ended, the host left the studio through a back exit, avoiding the press. He didn't want to hear journalists dissecting his failure. In the producer's room, the atmosphere was tense. Just an hour ago, everyone was confident that this interview would bring in millions of views and dominate headlines. Now, they were scrambling, desperately trying to figure out how to control the damage. But there was no time to strategize. The audience had already decided the outcome. Major TV networks were analyzing every second of the interview. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, BBC. Every outlet ran emergency segments about the viral moment. But their approaches were different. While some tried to defend the host, others admitted that he had lost control, and some outright called it the most humiliating moment of his career. And outside the world of television, political strategists were already assessing the consequences. For Republicans, this interview was a gift. Donald Trump's campaign team, preparing for his potential return to politics, immediately recognized the significance. Melania was no longer just a former First Lady. She was now a powerful media figure who could hold her ground under pressure. Political consultants began discussing her potential role in future elections. But the reaction from Democrats was even more telling. A closed-door meeting was held at the White House. Biden's advisors weren't worried about the interview itself. They were worried about how voters were responding to it. Early polling data suggested that many Republican voters now saw Melania as a strong, independent political figure, which threatened the existing political landscape. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, something unusual was happening. Large investors closely monitored social media trends before suddenly placing major bets on media companies aligned with Trump. Those who understood the power of public perception could already see the long-term implications. But the most unexpected consequence was that, without even planning it, Melania Trump had become part of a global media war. In Moscow, analysts were closely studying the situation. One prominent Russian political commentator remarked, "American politics has always been shaped by strong media figures." This interview proved that Melania Trump could be the next major player. If she was once seen only as Trump's wife, she has now shown she can hold her own on the global stage. In China, government-affiliated media strategists took a different approach. They weren't analyzing the content of her answers. They were studying her technique. A well-known media expert on Weibo commented, "Look at how she used pauses. How she let the host make the mistake. This wasn't just an interview. This was a masterclass in information warfare." But while the world debated her performance, Melania herself remained silent. The next day, She made a public appearance in New York, leaving Trump Tower under tight security. Cameras followed her every move, and reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Trump, did you expect such a reaction to the interview? Do you think your response will change your political future? Are you planning to make more public statements? She didn't answer a single one. She simply smiled, got in her black SUV, and drove away. That one smile immediately went viral. Some saw it as a sign of confidence. Others speculated that she was planning something bigger. Meanwhile, the network that aired the interview was under immense pressure. The executive board held emergency meetings to discuss how to handle the backlash. The company's stock took a hit as advertisers grew concerned about audience reactions. It was clear this disaster couldn't simply be buried by moving on to the next news cycle. As for the host, the once respected journalist, who had built his career on challenging powerful figures, was now a meme. His shocked expression flooded the internet. YouTubers created parody videos, late-night comedians reenacted the moment, and Twitter threads mocked his attempt to regain control. Desperate to salvage his reputation, he released a statement. "I was just doing my job." But that only made things worse. The public didn't want excuses. They had already chosen a winner. 3 days after the interview, new polling data shocked the media establishment. Melania Trump's favorability rating had surged by a record-breaking 18%, not just among Republicans, but also among independent voters. For political analysts, this was uncharted territory. No one had expected that one interview could so dramatically shift public perception. Behind closed doors, campaign strategists were already asking, what if she really does enter politics? What if this wasn't just an interview, but a test? What if this is only the beginning? The Biden administration prepared for new challenges. Trump's inner circle began discussing how to capitalize on the interview's impact. But the real question wasn't about the media storm. The real question was, what if Melania hasn't said everything she wanted to say yet? The end? Or just the beginning? Weeks had passed, but the impact of the interview had not faded. It had only grown stronger. Every day brought new headlines, expert analyses, leaks from political headquarters, and unexpected statements. It seemed that the interview had become a turning point for something much bigger than just a heated exchange on live television. The most influential media and political figures closely watched Melania Trump's every move, but she remained silent. Her absence from the conversation only fueled speculation. Political analysts debated whether her reaction had been a well-calculated strategy or pure improvisation. But they all agreed on one thing. This moment had permanently changed her role in American politics. At first, Trump's campaign team simply observed. But now, they were seriously discussing what position Melania could take in the future. Donald Trump was known for being unpredictable, but even his closest advisors realized that this momentum could not be wasted. Rumors began circulating that she might become the face of new Republican initiatives, and some bold theories even suggested the possibility of her own political ambitions. For Trump supporters, this was an exciting prospect. For his opponents, it was cause for concern. Democratic analysts scrambled to reassess their strategy for the upcoming elections. No one had expected that Melania, who had always remained in the background, would suddenly emerge as such a powerful figure. On television and social media, the topic refused to die down. Every public appearance she made was now a spectacle, analyzed frame by frame. Reporters followed her every step, searching for any signs of political aspirations, but she remained an enigma. This only made her image even more compelling. The internet was flooded with theories, analytical articles, and passionate debates. Some believed she was a strategist, others called her an accidental star, but no media expert could deny her influence. This interview triggered not only political consequences, but economic ones as well. Major Republican donors began taking an active interest in her influence. Conservative-leaning organizations discussed ways to involve her in their projects. Billionaire political financiers closely monitored the shifting polls, anticipating how her popularity could reshape the landscape. Some poured money into pro-Trump media outlets, expecting further growth in their reach. Meanwhile, Democrats were also forced to react. Behind closed doors, strategists emphasized the urgent need to introduce fresh faces who could counterbalance Melania's growing presence. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Would she use her newfound influence for something bigger, or would she let speculation continue to swirl? A month after the interview, she finally broke her silence. But she didn't do it through a traditional press conference or an exclusive sit-down interview. Instead, she released a direct-to-camera video on her official platforms. The setting was minimalistic without distractions. That simplicity made it even more powerful. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and devoid of provocation, yet every word was carefully measured. She did not make direct statements about her future plans, but she made one thing clear: she wasn't going anywhere. The video immediately went viral, racking up millions of views within hours. Television analysts debated its meaning. Some argued that this was the start of something new, while others believed it was simply a way to solidify her public image. Within Democratic circles, the video was seen as a clear challenge. Even journalists who had previously dismissed her began re-evaluating their stance. Even those who were not Trump supporters admitted that she had proven herself to be a force to be reckoned with. The effects of the interview began to reshape the political landscape. Some Republicans who had previously distanced themselves from Trump suddenly began aligning with him again, realizing that his influence had only grown stronger. Behind closed doors, party insiders began discussing how this newfound media power could be leveraged for the upcoming elections. Consultants drafted scenarios in which her presence could play a crucial role. But the real question on everyone's mind was whether she would take the next step. Meanwhile, Democrats were forced to change their strategy. Previous efforts to undermine Trump through lawsuits, media attacks, and scandals were no longer having the desired effect. Now, he had a new public figure in his circle, one who carried fresh energy, lacked political baggage, and was difficult to attack. The White House recognized that conventional methods of discrediting Trump might not work against Melania. Political strategists worked overtime to craft new approaches, but no one could predict what Melania would do next. Reporters followed her every step. In New York, journalists camped outside Trump Tower 24/7, waiting for a new statement. On primetime television, experts debated possible scenarios, politicians gave predictions, and online analysts dissected every word and gesture from her latest video. But while the media speculated, others were already preparing for real action. Then came the news that changed everything. Early one morning, a breaking report surfaced. An anonymous source close to the Trump family leaked information that Melania was preparing to make a major political statement in the coming months. Within minutes, the story was everywhere. Every news outlet picked it up. Social media exploded, and political commentators scrambled to assess what this could mean. Even though Melania had not said a single word, the entire country was already debating her next move. And now, the biggest question wasn't whether she had political aspirations. The biggest question was, what will she say next? Only she knew when and how to reveal the answer.